Thank you very much, Greg, for the introduction, and good morning, at least from here, and good evening if you are in Australia. And I'm happy to be here and to share with you the experience, and I'll be touching upon different aspects and different laws that also affect the life of Palestinians who live within Israel. So I will start straight away by sharing a PowerPoint with all of you. Let's see. Can everybody see this? Yeah.
I've muted myself, but yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So the Palestinians in Israel. There are three parts that I'm mainly going to touch upon, but I'm going to first talk about who are the Palestinian citizens of Israel and how did we come into this reality very briefly, and then I'll talk about three important parts that face the reality of young Palestinians, particularly young Palestinians within Israel. So part one will be legal discrimination, part two will be land and housing discrimination, and then part three is going to be police brutality. So as you're going through the series, the three different series, and you're covering different Palestinians who are living in different realities, we're today talking about the Palestinian citizens of Israel, as mentioned, and this is a quick and very brief mapping of where Palestinians can actually live when they're in this plot of land. So you see the Jewish Israelis can access the majority of the land besides some area A in the West Bank and Gaza, and then you can see that slowly Palestinians have less and less area to live in this land. So where do the Palestinians in Israel live? As you can see in the first map on your left, it's in the green areas, but we'll get into more details. But on the right side, you'll see more specifically the orange boxes, and the orange boxes are where Palestinians in Israel are actually present, and the blue boxes are Jewish Israeli citizens. So you can see that today, the majority of the Palestinians, citizens of Israel, are actually located in the north of Israel. So we're talking about 1.9, almost 2 million Palestinians who are living in Israel. And of the Palestinians living in Israel, 9% are Christians. And then you have, within the total population in Israel, the Christians are about 2%. From the Christians, the majority in Israel are Malachite, about 60%, and 30%, the rest of them are Greek Orthodox. So it's important to note that within the state of Israel, historic Palestine, we as a people are about 20 to 21% of the entire population. So how did we reach this reality that we're living in different locations where we're talking to Palestinians in the West Bank or in Gaza or outside of this area, diaspora, refugees, and then people here? It largely comes down to the Nakba in 1948. I'm assuming that many of you know about this, but in 1948, there was an ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from Palestine, where there were about over 700,000 refugees and people that were displaced from their homes, and 150,000 people remained. And of the 150,000 people that remained, my grandfather was one of them. And his goal was trying to keep the family in the land. But as Susan was mentioning earlier, she's originally from Ramle, from Lid, who then moved to Ramallah. And a lot of the refugees who live in Gaza and in Ramallah originate from Lid and Ramle, where in 1948, there were many massacres. And you can see also on the previous map that there are not many Palestinians left in these areas. It's also important to note that on the way when the people were crossing, lots of people were raped and got killed on the way when they were leaving, and when many of them were walking to the east. And also there was looting and theft of the Palestinians as they were leaving. And as they hid a lot of their jewelry, a lot of the new Jewish immigrants knew where to find them because they hid them in similar places during the Holocaust. Well, in terms of where we are, where my family's from. So my family, I live in Jerusalem, but my family's originally from a city called Lid or Lod. And you can see on the right that this is the Greek Orthodox Church in Lid, and this is a very old church. And my family helped to build the church. My ancestors helped to build the church, and you see on the left the document that was found by my grandfather's uncle, who went to the Greek Orthodox archive in Lebanon and found the first mention of my family, the Munayer family, in the 12th century. So we know that we have been in this area and this land for around 800 years, and if not more. And this is a big part of shaping the identity as well today of Palestinians who are living in Israel, and particularly our roots that go back. We have evidence that goes back 800 years, but if you want, there are also Arabs who heard, the people speaking in Pentecost of the Holy Spirit and decided to follow Jesus as well. So what's important to note is that there's this misconception that Palestinians in 1948 were inside Israel proper, were given citizenship, and everything was okay. And we are equal citizens to the Jewish Israeli citizens, and that is not the case. Between 1948 and 1966, the Palestinians in Israel were under military rule. And if you can see this blue arrow that's pointing to this man right here, that is my grandmother's brother. And what they did in 1948 so that families wouldn't resist or revolt against the new Zionists who had come, they held hostage several family members, and they were saying, if you try to resist, we will kill your family members. So this is when they were inside prison, and they also had to work hard labor for a year. So his name is Jack Munayer, and you can see the Greek Orthodox priest praying with them as they're held captive inside the prison. And also this ensured that under the military rule, that there were ghettos. So in Lid, in Lod, there was a ghetto where the Palestinians had to stay, and basically it's called Ghetto Lod, interestingly, and there have been books that have been written about it, and it ensured that Palestinians couldn't return to their homes. So this is largely how the background, and many Palestinians in Israel are not always aware of their narrative if they go to Jewish Israeli schools, and if their parents and grandparents don't teach the narrative as well. So it's important to know that this is how it's come to, and the trauma of our grandparents has largely also shaped the way we understand the current reality. So let's quickly move into legal discrimination and what are the differences, and what are some of the big controversial laws that are at the moment being enforced, and a new one one that has just been renewed a few days ago. So we're going to talk about legal discrimination. And if you also have an opportunity to visit the website of Adala, it's a organization that focuses on Palestinians in Israel. It's an NGO that also provides legal defense and can take cases to court. And they say that there are about 65 Israeli laws that discriminate directly or indirectly against Palestinian citizens in Israel, or Palestinians that are in Jerusalem who don't have citizenship but residency. The one that is, I'm assuming that maybe you've heard about it, is the nation state law. That is really a constitutional law that was passed in 2018. And essentially what this law is doing is asserting that Israel is the home of the Jewish people and the Jewish people only, and that the character of the Jewish state precedes and is more important than the supposed quote unquote democratic human rights values that Israel provides to its citizens. So it revoked Arabic as an official language as well. It views Jewish settlements as a national value, and as well as the right to self-determination is only unique to the Jewish people. And it means that if you come from a different ethnicity, a different religious background, or a different national background, it's saying basically you can live here, but you don't have the same right, you don't have the same self-expression and identity. And it is not in the sense valued, and the way it expressed itself, many people always ask, okay, but what does that mean? How does that impact your life? There's a case that it's been used in the north of Israel, in the Carmiel area, which is next to Haifa, where the court ruled in favor of not funding transportation of Palestinian children to go to school, because they were saying that children going to school in this area would compromise the demographic balance and damage the Jewish character, and they didn't want a lot of Palestinians moving there. They wanted to keep it Jewish. So I think this is, also comes hand in hand with the publication that came out by Amnesty International, that it's very obvious that there's an apartheid, perhaps in the West Bank, but an apartheid and domination of Palestinians by the Israeli court system, the judiciary system, and by society is also present in Israel. And also the legal hierarchy. So I just wanted to give some quotes that were said by former politicians. So Ayelet Shaked, the former Minister of Justice, said the new law, which is the nation-state law, should protect the Jewish character of the state, even if it means sacrificing human rights. And then the former Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said Israel is not a state of all its citizens. According to the new law that we passed, Israel is the nation-state of the Jewish people and only it. So this also really, shows the spirit in which this law was issued, and how it's going to be affected, and how it's affecting people, and how it's used already, and the purpose that it serves as well. I want to quickly talk about the Citizenship Law as well, that was renewed March 10th, which essentially bans Palestinians who are citizens of Israel to get married to Palestinians who are in the West Bank. And that's doing two major things that I think you need to be aware of. First, it's preventing, it's part of the plan of limiting the demographic and the population of the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel. I think that's the number one thing that I think you should be aware of. But the second thing, it also attempts to separate Palestinians, right? So there are Palestinians that are under different legal and in different frameworks or in different authorities, but we are all Palestinians. And there are Palestinians who are also exiled, so or refugees. So it's an attempt to also separate us, and there's also an attempt to separate Christians and Muslims within Palestine as well. So it is a racist form of collective punishment towards Palestinians, prevents 45,000 Palestinian families from reuniting with each other. And it has some ridiculous guidelines where it has, take an annual DNA test to prove that your children are yours. There are people that have to reapply every year to prove that they're indeed living here, and also many of the people who are trying to reunite don't access all of the benefits, such as healthcare. So I think this is the first part that I wanted to emphasize and share with everyone, which is the legal discrimination by law. And many times people are not aware of it and say that we have the same rights and enjoy the same status, which is not the case.